What would you do if you had it all? The billion-dollar company, the penthouse overlooking the city, the beautiful woman on your arm, and the gnawing emptiness of knowing you threw away the only thing that ever mattered. For Julian Thorne, this wasn't a hypothetical question. 8 months after a bitter divorce, he walked into a greasy spoon diner and saw a ghost from his past. It was his ex-wife, Elara, her face pale with exhaustion. But it wasn't her tired eyes or her waitress uniform that made his world stop spinning. It was the swell of her belly, a 7-month pregnancy, that was unmistakably real. The life he'd destroyed had created a new one without him, or so he thought. What happens next is a story of betrayal lies and a desperate search for redemption that will truly shock you. The clatter of cheap ceramic on Formica was a sound Julian Thorne hadn't heard in over a decade. It was the soundtrack of a life he'd clawed his way out of, a world of desperation and dwindling tips he'd replaced with the silent hum of servers in his penthouse and the clinking of champagne flutes at exclusive galas. He was only at the Daily Grind, a dingy 24-hour diner on the industrial side of Seattle, because his driver had gotten a flat tire in the torrential Pacific Northwest rain, and it was the only place with a light on for miles. He sat in a cracked vinyl booth, the scent of stale coffee and bacon grease clinging to his custom-tailored Brioni suit. He impatiently tapped the screen of his phone, firing off an email to his board about a hostile takeover bid. To him, this was just a frustrating delay, an irritating glimpse into how the other half lived. "Can I get you something, sir?" The voice was soft, hesitant, familiar. Julian looked up from his phone, annoyance etched on his face, ready to dismiss the server. And then the world tilted on its axis. It was Elara, his Elara. Or rather, the woman who used to be his Elara. 8 months ago, she was Elara Thorne, mistress of his mansion, the quiet, artistic soul who had been the anchor in his turbulent world. Now she was Elara Vance again. Her fiery red hair, once a cascade of professionally styled waves, was pulled back in a messy, functional ponytail. Dark circles bruised the delicate skin under her startlingly green eyes. She wore a faded blue waitress uniform, the name Ellie crudely stitched on a plastic name tag. A wave of conflicting emotions crashed over Julian. Shock, anger, a possessive pride that he had no right to feel. How could she be here? He had given her a divorce settlement that should have set her up for life. A 7-figure sum, enough to buy a gallery to travel the world to do anything but this. Elara. He breathed his voice, barely a whisper. Her face, already pale, went ashen. Her eyes widened, and for a second he saw pure, unadulterated panic. She clutched the notepad in her hand so tightly her knuckles went white. "Julian. What are you doing here?" "My car broke down." The words felt stupid, inadequate. His gaze swept over her, taking in the worn-out sneakers, the cheap apron stained with coffee. His eyes stopped snagged and then widened in disbelief. Beneath the apron, her uniform was stretched taut over the unmistakable pronounced curve of a heavily pregnant belly. The air left his lungs in a silent rush. Pregnant. Elara was pregnant. Not just a little bit. She looked to be 7, maybe 8 months along. The timeline slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. They had finalized the divorce 8 months ago. The bitter, soul-crushing end to their 5-year marriage had happened 9 months ago. The math was brutally simple. The baby, it had to be his. He started pointing a trembling finger, his usual, articulate command of language completely deserting him. Elara's free hand instinctively went to her stomach, a protective maternal gesture that sent another spear of shock through him. Her jaw tightened, her soft features hardening into a mask of defiance. I'm working, Julian. Can I take your order, or are you just here to stare?" The coldness of her tone snapped him out of his stupor. The old Julian, the ruthless CEO, the man who saw every problem as a negotiation, took over. "What is this, Alara, a game?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "The settlement I gave you. You should be on a beach somewhere, not doing this. And this." He gestured again at her stomach, a mixture of fury and confusion warring within him. "Why didn't you tell me?" A lone customer at the counter, a grizzled truck driver nursing a coffee, glanced over at them. Alara shot him a look that made him quickly turn back to his cup. "This is not the time or the place, Julian," she said through gritted teeth. "Then make time." He shot back, his arrogance flaring. He pulled out his wallet, the supple black leather, a stark contrast to the sticky table. He threw a platinum credit card down. "Quit. Right now. We're leaving. We're going to talk about this." He expected her to be relieved to see the logic. He was offering her an escape, a solution. He was Julian Thorne. He solved problems. But the look she gave him was not one of gratitude. It was one of profound, soul-deep pity. "You still don't get it, do you?" she whispered, her voice cracking with an emotion he couldn't decipher. "After all this time, you still think you can just buy your way out of everything you break." She pushed the credit card back across the table towards him. "Your money is the last thing I want. Now, if you're not going to order, I have other tables." She turned on her heel and walked away, her steps measured and heavy, the gait of a woman carrying the weight of more than just a child. Julian sat there, utterly stunned, the silence of the diner broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights and the sizzle of something frying on the griddle. He had built an empire Thorne Dynamics from nothing. He could bend markets to his will and ruin competitors with a single phone call. But in that moment, staring at the back of his pregnant ex-wife in her cheap uniform, Julian Thorne had never felt more powerless. The shocking reality wasn't just that she was pregnant with his child. It was that she wanted nothing to do with him. And he had no idea why. The ride back to his penthouse was a blur of rain-streaked city lights. Julian's driver, a stoic man named Arthur, had finally gotten the tire changed, but Julian barely registered his presence. He sat in the back of the Maybach, the scent of the diner still clinging to him, like a shroud, replaying the scene over and over in his mind. Alara, pregnant, working as a waitress. The images were so incongruous, so utterly alien to the life he had built, that his mind struggled to process them. He remembered their last explosive fight, her accusations of him being an emotionally absent workaholic, his cold, dismissive retorts. He'd told her she didn't understand what it took to build an empire. She'd told him he'd built an empire and forgotten how to be a husband. He'd won the argument, he thought. He'd ended the marriage and cut the check closing the chapter. Or so he'd believed. When he stepped into his penthouse, the contrast was jarring. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a glittering, rain-slicked Seattle skyline. Minimalist furniture, worth more than the entire diner he'd just left, was arranged with architectural precision. And standing by the bar, pouring 2 glasses of wine, was Isabella Rossi. Isabella was everything Alara wasn't. She was a socialite, the daughter of a rival tech CEO, with a razor-sharp business acumen and a public image as polished as the marble floors beneath her Louboutin heels. Their relationship was a merger of convenience and mutual ambition, a perfect pairing in the world they inhabited. She was beautiful, intelligent, and most importantly, she was not demanding. She understood his late nights and his obsession with work. "There you are, darling," she purred, gliding towards him. "I was getting worried. You missed the charity board pre-meeting." She held up a glass of wine, but stopped when she saw the look on his face. "Julian, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have," he said, his voice flat. He walked past her and sank onto a white leather sofa. "I saw Ilara." Isabella's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Oh, and how is the little artist spending all her alimony on paint and canvas, I presume?" There was a catty edge to her voice she barely bothered to conceal. "She's working," Julian said, ignoring the jibe. "As a waitress, in some roadside dive." Isabella let out a short, surprised laugh. "A waitress? Seriously, after the fortune you gave her? Some people just have no sense. She's probably broke already. She's pregnant, Isabella." The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. Isabella froze, the wine glass held halfway to her lips. Her smile vanished, replaced by a calculating stillness. "Pregnant," she repeated, slowly setting her glass down with a delicate click. How far along, I don't know. 7, 8 months, maybe." Isabella's mind worked with the speed of a high-frequency trader. She walked over to the sofa and sat beside him, her demeanor shifting from dismissive to one of concerned counsel. "Julian, darling, let's think about this logically." She began, her voice smooth and persuasive. "The divorce was finalized 8 months ago. The proceedings started before that. You two were barely speaking for months." She placed a manicured hand on his arm. "Are you absolutely 100% certain that the child is yours?" The question was a spark landing on a field of dry tinder. He hadn't even allowed himself to consider it. The timing, the sheer shock of it all. He had just assumed. But now, with Isabella's cool logic piercing through his emotional turmoil, a sliver of ice-cold doubt began to form in his gut. He thought back to the end of their marriage. It had been ugly. They were living in the same house, but were emotionally miles apart. He was consumed by a particularly brutal acquisition deal, working 18-hour days. Ilara had grown distant quiet. She was often out visiting her artist friends, she'd said. At the time, he was too busy to care. I don't know, he admitted, the uncertainty tasting like acid. The idea that she could have been with someone else. It was a profound insult to his pride, to his very identity. He was Julian Thorne. Women didn't cheat on him. Exactly. Isabella pressed, sensing her advantage. She never told you, did she? If it was yours, Julian, a woman in her position, divorcing a billionaire, the first thing she would do is tell you she's pregnant. It's the ultimate leverage. But she didn't. Instead, she's hiding, working a menial job. Why? Because she knows you're not the father, and she was hoping you'd never find out. Every word was a carefully placed brick, building a wall of doubt around his heart. It made a perverse kind of sense. Ilara, the proud, stubborn artist, would rather scrub floors than admit she'd been unfaithful and was carrying another man's child. His settlement would have felt like blood money to her in that context. She knew a paternity test would expose her. Isabella concluded, her voice a sympathetic whisper. "Oh, Julian, I'm so sorry. She's trying to play you for a fool." The narrative clicked into place, a dark and twisted key, fitting a lock he didn't know was there. The shock morphed into a cold, hard rage. The image of Ilara's protective hand on her belly was no longer one of maternal instinct, but one of deceit. Her defiance was not strength. It was the cornered fear of someone with a secret. He stood up, pacing the length of the vast living room. "I need to know for sure." "Of course you do," Isabella said, standing with him. "You need to protect yourself. You need to handle this before it becomes a public scandal." The word handle resonated with him. That's what he did. He handled things. He didn't get emotional. He strategized. The next morning, Julian didn't call Ilara. He didn't go back to the diner. He called his lawyer, who in turn gave him the number of a man named David Chen, the best private investigator in the city. A man known for his discretion and his unnerving ability to find the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. "I want to know everything," Julian instructed Chen over the phone, his voice devoid of emotion. "Where she lives, who she sees, who she's been seeing for the past year. I want to know who the father is. I want leverage." As he hung up, he felt a grim sense of control return. Isabella was right. This was just another hostile situation, another problem to be managed. He would uncover the truth, expose her lies, and put this messy, humiliating chapter behind him for good. He refused to be the fool in Ilara Vance's tragic little story. He would be the victor, as always. But as he stared out at the city, he owned a tiny, unwelcome thought pricked at him. What if Isabella was wrong? What if the truth was something far more complicated and far more devastating than a simple betrayal? David Chen was not the sort of man you saw in movies. He wasn't a grizzled ex-cop with a drinking problem or a slick operative in a sports car. He was a quiet, unassuming man in his late 40s, with a preference for grey suits that helped him blend into the background. His greatest assets were patience and an almost supernatural ability to observe without being noticed. For 2 weeks, he made Ilara Vance his sole focus. He didn't use intimidation or illegal wiretaps. He used meticulous old-fashioned legwork. He sat in his modest sedan across the street from her small second-floor apartment in a run-down but clean building in Fremont. He watched her walk to the bus stop every afternoon, her movements slow and deliberate, her hand often resting on her stomach. He followed the bus route to the daily grind. He sat in the diner for hours, nursing the same cup of coffee, watching her work. He saw her wince when she had to bend over to wipe a table. He saw her force a smile for a rude customer who complained his hash browns were too crispy. He saw the sheer exhaustion on her face at the end of her shift when she thought no one was watching. He saw her friend, a fiery brunette named Chloe, pick her up some nights, her arm wrapped protectively around Ilara's shoulders. He documented her life, her trips to the grocery store where she spent long minutes comparing prices on canned vegetables, her visits to a free prenatal clinic downtown, her evenings spent alone, the light from her window showing her sketching in a large notepad. There were no men, no secret late-night visitors, no mysterious phone calls. Her life was a simple Spartan and lonely routine work clinic groceries home. After 2 weeks, David Chen compiled his report. It was a thin folder containing surveillance photos, a summary of her daily activities, and a background check. He scheduled a meeting with Julian Thorne at his office, a sleek, impersonal space of glass and steel that screamed power. Julian sat behind a massive mahogany desk, Isabella perched elegantly on the corner of it, a silent partner in this inquisition. So Julian demanded, dispensing with any pleasantries. "Who is he?" David Chen placed the folder on the desk, but didn't push it forward. He looked Julian directly in the eye. "Mr. Thorne, my job is to provide you with facts. And the facts are as follows. Ilara Vance lives a life of extreme modesty. She works a 60-hour week at a low-wage job. Her only recurring appointments are at a public health clinic for prenatal care. Her only consistent social contact is with a friend named Chloe Davis, a kindergarten teacher." He paused, letting the information sink in. For the past 2 weeks, she has not had contact with any man other than customers at the diner and the elderly landlord who collected her rent in person. I also ran a background check covering the past year. There are no signs of a relationship, no joint accounts, no cohabitation records, no social media footprints indicating a partner. Julian stared at him, his face a thunderous mask. "That's impossible. You missed something." "I am very thorough," Sir Chen replied calmly. "There is nothing to miss. Her life is exactly what it appears to be a struggle." Isabella scoffed, flipping her dark hair over her shoulder. "He's obviously hiding. She's protecting him. This doesn't prove anything." Perhaps Chen conceded. He finally pushed the folder across the desk. "But I did find one other thing. It might be nothing, but in my experience, it's the small details that matter." Julian opened the folder. Inside were grainy photos of Ilara on the bus in the grocery store, and one particularly clear shot of her leaving the clinic, her face etched with worry. Beneath them was a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of a pawn shop receipt. The receipt was dated 2 months ago. Ilara Vance had sold a single item, a custom-designed 5-carat diamond engagement ring. The description and serial number matched the one Julian had given her. The price she'd received for it was a fraction of its value, but it would have been enough to cover a security deposit and a few months' rent on her cheap apartment. Julian's blood ran cold. He remembered that ring. He'd commissioned it himself. He also remembered the terms of their divorce settlement. His lawyers had structured it as a trust disbursing monthly payments. It was designed to be ironclad to prevent her from squandering it all at once. The first payment was scheduled for the first of the month, every month. "She hasn't touched the settlement money," Julian said, the realization dawning on him. "Not a single dime." "Correct," Chen confirmed. "The account has not been activated. The monthly disbursements from the trust are sitting untouched, accumulating. According to my financial inquiries, she is living entirely off her wages and whatever she got from that ring." The room fell silent. Isabella's smug certainty faltered. This didn't fit their narrative. A woman hiding an affair wouldn't be living in poverty while sitting on a fortune. A woman trying to trap a new man wouldn't be selling off her last tie to a life of luxury. It made no sense. "Why?" Julian whispered, looking at the photo of Ilara leaving the clinic. Her strength, which he had mistaken for deceitful defiance, now looked like something else, entirely desperate pride. "Why would she live like this? As I said, my job is to provide facts, not motives," Chen said, standing up. "But if you were to ask for my professional opinion—" "She isn't hiding a man, Mr. Thorne. She's hiding from you." With that, David Chen collected his fee and left, leaving Julian and Isabella alone in the sterile silence of the office. The investigator's words echoed in Julian's mind. "She's hiding from you. Why? Why would she subject herself and their child to such hardship? It was a punishment, but for what? For his neglect, for the cold way he'd ended things. It seemed disproportionate, masochistic even." His mind reeled back to the final months of their marriage, to the fight that had shattered everything. He had been so sure of himself then, so certain of her betrayal. What was it? Isabella asked, her voice uncharacteristically small. The final fight. What happened? Julian didn't want to think about it. It was a memory he had locked away, a moment of ugly, righteous fury. But now the foundation of that fury was cracking. "It was my partner," Julian said slowly, the memory surfacing like a piece of wreckage. "Marcus Blackwood. He was worried about me. He said Ilara had been distant. He said he'd seen her with someone. He remembered Marcus, his best friend, and the COO of Thorne Dynamics, showing him photos on his phone. Grainy long-lens shots of Ilara having coffee with another man, an artist from her circle. They were laughing. In one shot, his hand was on her arm. It was circumstantial, but Marcus had framed it with concern. "I don't want to see you get hurt, Julian. The company needs you focused." Then came the text messages Marcus had, accidentally, seen on her phone when she'd left it at their house. vague, intimate-sounding messages that could have been about anything, but in the poisoned context Marcus had created, they seemed like damning evidence of an affair. Julian had confronted her. He hadn't asked for an explanation. He had accused. He had presented the evidence like a prosecutor. She had looked at him utterly heartbroken and had simply said, "If that's what you believe, Julian, then there's nothing left to say." She hadn't fought. She hadn't denied it. She had just accepted his verdict. At the time, he'd seen it as an admission of guilt. Now, looking at the pawn shop receipt and the bleak report from David Chen, her reaction looked completely different. It looked like the response of a woman who had realized her husband's trust in her was so fragile that it could be shattered by a few grainy photos and the whispers of a so-called friend. It was the silence of absolute defeat. A horrifying new possibility began to take root in Julian's mind. What if the lie wasn't Ilara's? What if the betrayal had come from somewhere else entirely, from the one person he thought he could trust above all others? He looked at Isabella, his eyes wild with a dawning horror. Marcus, he breathed. It was all Marcus. Marcus Blackwood was more than Julian's business partner. He was the co-creator of Thorn Dynamics, the yin to Julian's yang. Julian was the visionary, the mercurial genius who came up with the game-changing ideas. Marcus was the operator, the logistical mastermind who turned Julian's visions into profitable realities. They had been friends since their dorm room days, building their empire on a foundation of ambition and what Julian had always believed was unshakable loyalty. The idea that Marcus, his best friend, the best man at his wedding, could have orchestrated the destruction of his marriage seemed insane. But as Julian drove through the city, ignoring Isabella's frantic calls, the pieces began to click into place with terrifying clarity. He remembered conversations from that time. Marcus constantly emphasizing the importance of the acquisition deal. "You can't afford any distractions right now, Julian. This deal will make us legends." He remembered Marcus's subtle digs at Ilara. "She's a lovely girl, but does she really understand the pressure you're under?" "My wife, she gets it. She knows when to stay out of the way." It had all been presented as friendly advice, as a partner looking out for him. Now it felt like a campaign, a slow, methodical poisoning of his mind. But why the answer was as simple as it was devastating Thorn Dynamics. Julian was the face of the company, the majority shareholder. But in the event of a public, messy divorce, especially one involving infidelity on his wife's part, a good lawyer could argue that the stress had impacted Julian's judgment, potentially making his leadership position vulnerable during the delicate acquisition period. Marcus, the steady number 2, would have been the natural choice to step in as interim CEO to stabilize the ship. Had that been the plan all along, to isolate him, push Ilara out, and gain more control? Julian felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't just lost his wife. He had been a pawn in a corporate coup, and he hadn't even seen it. His own ambition and arrogance had been the weapons Marcus had used against him. He had been so focused on conquering the world that he hadn't noticed the snake in his own boardroom. He needed proof. A confrontation would be useless. Marcus was too slick, too skilled at corporate politics. He would deny everything, paint Julian as a paranoid, heartbroken man. Julian pulled over his mind, racing. He thought about the evidence Marcus had shown him, the photos, the text messages. They had been on Marcus's phone. He had to get access to that data. He called David Chen. "I have a new job for you," Julian said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "It's off the books and highly illegal. I need access to Marcus Blackwood's digital life. His cloud storage, his deleted files, everything. Name your price." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That's not what I do, Mr. Thorne. Everyone has a price," Chen Julian snapped. "I'm not trying to blackmail him. I'm trying to uncover the truth. A man destroyed my life, and I need to prove it." He told Chen the whole story, the suspicions, the photos, the timing. He laid his hypothesis bare. Chen was silent for a moment, processing. "This goes beyond a standard investigation," Chen said finally. "It requires a specialist, a digital forensics expert. It will be extremely expensive and extremely risky." "I built $1 billion company from a line of code," Julian replied. "I understand risk. Just get it done." The next 48 hours were the longest of Julian's life. He locked himself in his penthouse, shutting out the world. He ignored Isabella. He ignored his board. He just waited, staring out at the city, re-examining every memory of the past year through this new, horrifying lens. He saw Ilara's pained smiles, her attempts to reach him, and his own dismissive, work-obsessed responses. He saw how perfectly Marcus had played on his insecurities, his pride, and his fatal flaw, the belief that his business was the most important thing in his life. Finally, at 3 a.m., on the second day, he received a secured email from David Chen. It contained a single password-protected file. Julian's hands trembled as he typed in the password. The file opened, revealing a treasure trove of deception. There were the original uncropped photos of Ilara with her artist friend. They were taken at a public art fair. In the wider shots, it was clear they were part of a large group of people. Marcus had carefully cropped and zoomed in to create a false sense of intimacy. Then came the text messages. They weren't screenshots from Ilara's phone. They were fabrications created using a simple app. The forensic analysis showed the timestamps were manipulated. But the final piece of evidence was the most damning. It was a thread of deleted emails between Marcus Blackwood and a board member from the company they had been acquiring. The emails laid out the plan in cold, corporate language. Marcus detailed his strategy to mitigate the Julian Thorne distraction, ensuring that if Thorne became emotionally compromised during the final stages of the merger, Marcus would have the board's support to assume control. He had literally gambled on Julian's divorce to secure a bigger piece of the pie. One email from Marcus stood out, written just days before he showed Julian the fake evidence he's wound too tight. "The marriage is the weak point. A little push is all it will take for the whole thing to collapse. He'll thank me for it later. He's better off without her anyway." She was holding him back. Julian felt the rage drain out of him, replaced by a profound, cavernous emptiness. He hadn't just been tricked. He had been a willing participant. He had let Marcus slander his wife, had believed the very worst of her without a second thought, because it was easier than confronting his own failings as a husband. He had chosen his empire over his wife, and Marcus had simply handed him the excuse he needed. The screen blurred as his eyes filled with tears for the first time in years. He wasn't just grieving the loss of his marriage or the betrayal of his friend. He was grieving the man he could have been, the husband he should have been, the father he was about to become, who had started his journey with an act of devastating cruelty to his child's mother. He now had the proof. He could destroy Marcus, ruin him publicly and professionally. But that felt hollow. Vengeance wouldn't fix what was truly broken. It wouldn't undo the pain he had caused Ilara. It wouldn't change the fact that his child was about to be born into a world where its mother was scrubbing floors while its father lived in a palace built on lies. He knew what he had to do. The first step wasn't to confront Marcus, it was to confront himself. And then he had to go to Ilara and tell her the whole ugly, unforgivable truth. The boardroom at Thorne Dynamics was Julian's kingdom. A cathedral of glass and steel on the 50th floor, it offered a panoramic view of the city he had conquered. It was here that he had made his fortune, celebrated his victories, and crushed his enemies. It was the perfect stage for the final act. He called an emergency board meeting. He didn't state the reason, which sent a ripple of panic through the company's executive level. When the board members were assembled, sitting around the vast obsidian table, Marcus Blackwood took his seat to Julian's right, a look of mild concern on his face. "Julian, what's this about?" Marcus asked, his voice a smooth performance of collegial worry. "Is there a problem with the quarterly projections?" Julian didn't answer. He stood at the head of the table, his face pale, but his eyes burning with an intensity that silenced the room. He tapped a command into the tablet in front of him, and the massive screen at the end of the room flickered to life. It displayed the first email, the one from Marcus to the rival board member. "He's wound too tight. The marriage is the weak point. A little push is all it will take." A collective gasp went through the room. Marcus's face went from concerned to chalk white in a nanosecond. He shot a venomous glare at Julian. "What is this, Julian? This is insane. This is fabricated." Julian ignored him. He brought up the next piece of evidence, the original photos of Ilara at the art fair, displayed side by side with the cropped, manipulated versions Marcus had shown him. Then, the forensic breakdown of the faked text messages. He laid out the entire deception piece by painful piece, his voice cold and steady, narrating the story of his own betrayal, not with anger, but with a strange, detached sorrow. For a year, Julian concluded his gaze, finally locking on to Marcus. "I have been operating under the belief that my marriage ended because of my wife's infidelity. The truth is that my marriage ended because of my partner's greed and my own unforgivable blindness." Marcus stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "This is a slanderous lie. He's having a breakdown. He's trying to find a scapegoat for his failed marriage." "Is it a lie?" Marcus Julian asked quietly. He played one last file. It was an audio recording. David Chen, ever thorough, had managed to capture a recent phone call in which Marcus, feeling victorious, had bragged to the same board member about how perfectly his plan had worked and how easily Julian had been manipulated. The voice of Marcus Blackwood, smug and self-congratulatory, filled the silent boardroom. The denial died on his lips. He was exposed utterly and completely. The board members, titans of industry themselves, looked from the damning evidence to the ashen face of Marcus, and then to the grimly resolved Julian. They were predators, and they could smell career-ending blood in the water. "Marcus Blackwood," Julian said, his voice now ringing with an authority he hadn't felt in months. "You are fired from this board and this company effective immediately. Security will escort you out. I will see you in court." Marcus stared at him, his face a mask of pure hatred. "You'll regret this, Julian. You've just thrown away the best partner you'll ever have." "No," Julian replied, the truth of the statement hitting him with its full weight. "I already did that 8 months ago." Security guards entered and escorted a sputtering, defeated Marcus from the room. The ordeal was over. He had won. He had cleared Ilara's name and avenged them both. But as the remaining board members started talking over one another, some offering support, others clearly calculating their next move, Julian felt nothing. Vengeance was ashes in his mouth. Exposing Marcus hadn't healed a single thing. It had only confirmed the depth of his own stupidity. He walked out of the boardroom without another word, leaving the chaos behind him. There was only one thing left to do, the hardest thing he would ever have to do in his life. He drove himself to Fremont, to the small apartment building he now knew so well. He climbed the 2 flights of stairs, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He stood outside her door, apartment 2B, for a full minute, trying to compose himself. What could he possibly say? Sorry I believed you were a cheating liar and destroyed our lives because my best friend tricked me, he knocked. After a moment, the door opened a crack held by a chain lock. Ilara peered through the gap, her green eyes wide and fearful. She was wearing a simple maternity dress, and she looked exhausted. "Julian," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "You can't be here. Please just go." "Ilara, please," he begged, his voice raw. "I'm not here to offer you money. I'm not here to make demands. I just need 5 minutes to tell you the truth. All of it. You deserve that." Perhaps it was the desperation in his voice or the utter lack of his usual arrogance, but she hesitated. After a long moment, she slowly closed the door, unlatched the chain and opened it again, stepping back to let him in. Her apartment was tiny but immaculate. Sketches of landscapes and portraits were tacked to the walls. A half-finished sculpture of a mother and child sat on a small table. It was a home filled with the art and soul he had so carelessly discarded. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the small room, not feeling worthy enough to sit down. He didn't know where to begin, so he just started. The words tumbling out in a torrent of shame and regret. He told her everything about Marcus, the photos, the texts, the corporate plot. He told her about his own ambition, his neglect, how he had been so primed to believe the worst of her because it absolved him of his own guilt for being a terrible husband. "I was a fool, Ilara," he finished, his voice breaking. "A proud, arrogant fool. He played me, yes, but I let him. I wanted to believe him. It was easier than admitting that I was the one who had failed us. I am so sorry. For everything." He looked at her expecting anger, tears, screaming. Instead, she just stood there, her arms wrapped around her belly, her expression unreadable. She had listened to the entire sordid tale without interruption. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, weary, but clear as a bell. "You know, for months, I've asked myself what I did wrong," she said, her eyes looking past him at a memory. "I thought maybe if I had been more like the women you admired, more aggressive, more business-minded, less me, maybe you would have loved me enough to trust me." She finally met his gaze, and he saw not fury, but a profound sadness. "It turns out it had nothing to do with me at all," she continued. "It was just a business deal. Our marriage, our life. It was just a liability on your balance sheet, and Marcus helped you write it off. No, Ilara, it wasn't like that." He started, desperate to make her understand. "Yes, it was, Julian," she interrupted, her voice gaining a steely edge. "Don't you see? You talk about Marcus's betrayal, but the real betrayal happened long before that. It happened every night you chose a spreadsheet over me. Every time I tried to talk to you, and you looked at your phone instead. Marcus didn't destroy our marriage. He just swept up the pieces of something you had already allowed to die. Every word was true. Every word was a dagger in his heart. "I forgive you, Julian," she said, and for a fleeting second his heart soared with hope. But then she delivered the final, devastating blow. "I forgive you because I have to. For my baby. I can't carry this anger around. But forgiving you and letting you back into my life are two very different things." She took a deep breath. "I don't need your money. I don't need your protection. And I don't need your drama. What my child and I need is peace. And that's the one thing you've never known how to give. So thank you for the truth. Now I'm asking you to give me the one last thing I need from you, distance. Please, Julian, leave us alone." It wasn't a negotiation. It was a verdict. She, the waitress he had pitied, was now standing in judgment of him, the billionaire, and she had found him wanting. He had come to offer an apology, hoping for a path to reconciliation. Instead, she had offered him forgiveness, and in the same breath had shown him the door to a future that did not include him. It was the most profound rejection of his life. Julian walked out of Ilara's apartment and into the grey Seattle drizzle a man hollowed out. Her words echoed in his mind, more damning than anything Marcus had ever done. Marcus didn't destroy our marriage. He just swept up the pieces of something you had already allowed to die. He had spent the last 48 hours focused on an external enemy, on a betrayal he could fight. But Ilara had forced him to look inward, to face the rot that had been there all along. He was the problem. His ambition, his obsession, the very empire he had built, it was all a monument to his failure as a man. He drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights a meaningless smear. He ended up at Gasworks Park, staring across the water at the glittering skyline he had once seen as his trophy. Now it looked like a cage. Each lit window in his penthouse in his office tower was a bar. Ilara was right. He had no concept of peace. His entire life had been a series of battles for market share, for acquisitions, for power. He had applied the same ruthless logic to his marriage, and when it showed a weakness, he hadn't tried to fix it. He'd cut his losses. He couldn't undo the past. He couldn't unsay the cruel things he'd said, or give back the years of neglect. He couldn't force Ilara to love him again, or accept him as a father. She had asked for one thing, distance, and he would give it to her. But he could change who he was. He could become a man worthy of the forgiveness she had given him. The first step was to tear down the idol he had worshipped for so long, Thorne Dynamics. The next morning, Julian Thorne walked into his office and began the process of dismantling his own life. He called a meeting with his legal and financial teams. "I want to sell my controlling interest in Thorne Dynamics," he announced, his voice flat and resolute. The room erupted. His advisors were aghast. "Julian, you can't be serious. We're on the verge of becoming the biggest player in the industry. This is your life's work," his lead counsel, Robert, protested. "It's not my life," Julian replied calmly. "It was a substitute for one. I'm selling. All of it. Draft the papers. Find a buyer who will ensure the employees are protected, but get it done." He didn't stop there. He liquidated his portfolio of stocks, his real estate holdings, his collection of rare cars. He was systematically setting fire to the gilded world he had constructed. Isabella, upon hearing the news, was a whirlwind of fury and disbelief. "Have you lost your mind?" she shrieked at him over the phone. "You're throwing everything away." For her, the pathetic waitress, "You're a laughingstock, Julian." "Maybe," he said, feeling a strange sense of calm. "But for the first time in a long time, I think I might be able to respect the man I see in the mirror. Goodbye, Isabella." He hung up, severing the final tie to his old life. The process took weeks. The business world was alight with rumors about the eccentric meltdown of the great Julian Thorne. He ignored them all. While his lawyers and bankers handled the massive transactions, Julian focused on something else. He remembered a dream Ilara once had. Years ago, before his ambition had consumed him, she had talked about wanting to start a foundation, a non-profit that provided grants and studio space for struggling artists, for people like her who had talent but lacked resources. He had dismissed it at the time as a cute but impractical hobby. Now it was the only thing that made sense. Using a significant portion of the money from his sales, he anonymously established the Vance Foundation, named in honor of her maiden name. He worked with a philanthropic consultant to structure it perfectly, ensuring it would be self-sustaining for decades. He endowed it with enough capital to build a state-of-the-art facility in a renovated warehouse district, complete with studios, galleries, and living quarters for artists in residence. He did all of this from a distance, through layers of lawyers and accountants, ensuring his name was never attached to it. This wasn't a grand gesture to win her back. It wasn't a way of buying her affection. It was an act of penance. It was him trying to build something that created beauty and hope instead of just profit margins. It was his way of honoring the woman he had failed, the only way he knew how. He moved out of the penthouse and into a simple furnished apartment with a view of a park instead of the city. He learned to cook for himself, to do his own laundry, to live a quiet, solitary life. He read the books Elara had always tried to get him to read. He visited art galleries, trying to see the world through her eyes. He honored her request for distance. He didn't call text or try to see her. He had David Chen discreetly keep an eye on her, not to spy, but to ensure she was safe. Chen's reports were simple. She had quit her job at the diner and was attending her clinic appointments regularly. She seemed peaceful. One day, Chen sent a single photo. It was of a public announcement for the new Vance Foundation, calling for its first round of applicants. The article mentioned an anonymous benefactor who wished to support the local arts community. Julian knew Elara would see it. He hoped it would bring her a small measure of happiness, knowing a dream she once had was now a reality. He didn't need her to know it was from him. He just needed it to exist in the world, a tangible apology that would do more good than his words ever could. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. He tracked the progress of her pregnancy through the calendar. She was due any day now. A gnawing anxiety mixed with a profound sense of loss filled him. He was going to be a father, but he wouldn't be there. He had forfeited that right. Then, one rainy Tuesday, he got a call from an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Hello." There was a pause and then a familiar voice, hesitant but clear. "Julian, it's Chloe." Elara's friend. Julian's heart stopped. "Is she okay? Is the baby?" "She's fine. They're both fine," Chloe said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "She had a baby girl this morning. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. She's beautiful." Tears of relief and sorrow streamed down Julian's face. A girl. He had a daughter. "Chloe, why are you calling me?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Because Elara told me to," she replied. "And also, we saw the news about the foundation. I'm a kindergarten teacher, Julian. I'm not stupid. I know you're not the monster you tried to be. Elara does too." There was another pause. "She's not ready to see you, not yet. But she said you deserve to know her name. Her name is Hope. Hope." The name was a punch to the gut and a balm to his soul all at once. He hung up the phone, a broken man who had thrown away a kingdom of glass and steel, and in its place had just been given a single fragile seed of hope. It was more than he deserved, and it was everything he needed. The months that followed were a quiet atonement. Julian Thorne, once a king in a glass tower, now lived a simple, solitary life. His vast fortune was gone, either securing his daughter's future or fueling the Vance Foundation, the anonymous gift he had given to the city's art community. His only connection to the child he'd never met was a single photo sent by Chloe each week. He'd stare at the images of Hope, her first smile, her tiny fists, with a mix of profound love and heart-wrenching regret. He kept his distance, as Elara had asked, sending only small, thoughtful gifts, a soft blanket, a rare children's book. They were quiet acknowledgements, not grand gestures. He was building a new legacy, not of profit, but of purpose. He was trying to become a man his daughter could one day be proud of. 6 months after Hope's birth, on a crisp autumn afternoon, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "She has your eyes, you know." Julian's breath hitched. His fingers trembled as he stared at the words. Before he could even think of a reply, a second message appeared. "There's a coffee shop on the corner of 3rd and Pine. La Marzocco. I'll be there in an hour, if you want to come." It was signed simply E. He arrived early, his heart pounding. When Ilara walked in, pushing a stroller, the world seemed to slow. The weary exhaustion was gone, replaced by the calm, radiant confidence of a mother. She saw him and offered a small, tentative smile before making her way to his table. Tucked inside the stroller, sleeping peacefully, was his daughter. She was perfect. "Hello, Julian," Ilara said softly. He couldn't speak, his gaze fixed on the tiny, miraculous face of his child. "Hope," he finally whispered. "I've been watching, Julian," Ilara said, her voice steady. "The foundation, the way you just disappeared. You tore down your entire world. It was built on a rotten foundation," he replied, finally meeting her eyes. "It deserved to fall." She studied his face, seeing not a billionaire, but a man stripped bare of his arrogance. "You can't fix what you broke, Julian. We can never go back to what we were." His heart fell, but he nodded in understanding. "But Hope deserves a father," she continued, and his gaze snapped back to hers. "And maybe her parents deserve a second chance, not to be husband and wife, but to be something new, something honest." She reached across the table, her hand covering his. It was the first time she had touched him in over a year. "Let's start with coffee, Julian," she said, a genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time. "And you can tell me about the man you are now." Looking at the sleeping child between them, and the woman he had wronged, Julian knew he had lost an empire. But in that small coffee shop, he had finally gained the entire world. This story is a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't measured in stock prices or square footage, but in trust, forgiveness, and the courage to change. Julian Thorne had to lose everything he thought he wanted to finally gain the one thing he actually needed, a second chance. It's a story about how easily our ambition can blind us, and how the lies we tell ourselves are often more destructive than the lies told to us by others. What would you have done in Ilara's situation? Could you have ever forgiven him? Or if you were Julian, could you have walked away from an empire you built with your own hands to earn back the trust of the person you love? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. These stories are meant to make us think and feel, and we love hearing your perspectives. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more shocking and emotional real-life stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.